Well, where are you at now?
Out of Charleston. No, yeah, out of Charleston, West Virginia.
I'll show a picture of it. Kind of all gathers around down on the river, doesn't it? Beautiful country. Look at the moon up there over the hills. Here comes Miss Linda. Come here, let me show you something. Turn around, look up there over top of the bus. Isn't that pretty? Now that would make a good antenna.
Get him, singer.
Betty Boop.
You would.
Watch out.
I'd like to know where you're at.
I'm in Beckley, West Virginia at the Holiday Inn.
You're in West Virginia, are you?
I am.
Aha. How did you get here?
We came to Huntington and then Charleston, and in the morning we're going to get up and go towards South Carolina, Charleston.
And what are you fixing to do now?
Eat.
Back behind us there, some of our friends.
There's only one there right now.
They're watching.
He's waving.
Oh, okay. Wave again. It's nice in there. Every booth has a little TV set to watch. That's kind of nice. Well, I'm gonna turn off the camera because I gotta eat. Where are you, young lady?
I'm in Virginia.
Have you ever been to Virginia before?
Don't think so.
First time, huh? Pretty country.
Why is it when everybody gets the camera on, they out of wave? It seems like a farther.
Yeah, it only took us an hour and 50 minutes to go 20 miles.
Yeah, I told him.
stop at the Golden Corral in North Carolina.
Baptismal services, and we had some good ones. I remember I'd baptize. We had a beautiful baptismal little area. We had a mural. One of our lessons painted their own mural. Me tickled. Sheep and armadillos painted in the backyard. One of our ladies said, "I think it adds so much to the service." I said, "It does add something, I'll admit." Oh, we had a good time. I remember I preached hard out, sure enough I get to baptize, and one time I baptized.
Or their poop doesn't.
Welcome you here this morning as we get prepared to roll out from the Visitor Center.
for the last 4 years in a row, I understand that you're going to be spending a little bit of time in Charleston, that you're not just flying in and flying out again. So I'm happy to hear that, and so I want to share with you that for the last 4 years in a row, the respondents of Condé Nast Travelers Poll have selected Charleston, not New York, not D.C., not Miami, not New Orleans, not Vegas, not San Francisco, not Seattle, all fabulous cities that I've enjoyed visiting. But they've selected Charleston as their favorite city in America to visit, second in the world to Kyoto, Japan, by a few percentage points. 3 years ago, we did have that #1 in the world ranking, and so I hope that your stay here will be enjoyable and pleasant, and I'm doing whatever I can in the couple hours that I'm going to have with you today to try to get that #1 in the world ranking back to the good old U.S. today, my hometown of Charleston, South Carolina. One of the city's nicknames is the City of Firsts. Now, I know especially for folks coming to visit us from other parts of the country that have ideas of what the South is about, and certainly understanding the pride that a city like Charleston takes in its past, something like that comes as a bit of a surprise to them. And maybe it has something to do with that billboard at the state line that they saw that says, "Welcome to South Carolina, please set your watches back 25 years. But nonetheless, a number of important firsts that did occur here. You'll notice from the visitor center that we just left from here a few moments ago, that it looks like a railroad depot, and that's exactly what it was. Because in 1830, the first locomotive completely made in the United States, the best friend of Charleston, made its first trip here from this area on Christmas Day of 1830, a total of 16 miles. And then in 1831, established the first regularly scheduled passenger service by rail in the United States, and also the first delivery of the United States mail by railroad as well. At a breakneck speed of 20 miles an hour, this was a considerable advance in technology on the delivering of our mail. I don't know if there's ever been an appreciable increase in its timeliness of the delivery of our mail, likewise since then. But nonetheless, that was quite a leap at the time. This is King Street that we are on. This is the high ground of the spine of the peninsula, the old King's Way, the ancient trading Indian path of legend and lore. Now, when I say high ground, that's a relative term here in Charleston, the center of what we call the low country. The average elevation, 10 feet. But nonetheless, this is sort of like the Continental Divide. This is sort of like the Continental Divide, where everything to the right of us flows west into the Ashley River. Everything ahead of us flows east into the Cooper River. Charleston is a peninsular city lying between those two rivers, and this is dry ground all the way down the spine of the peninsula as King Street. Off to the left, you see a reproduction of that locomotive, the best friend of Charleston, which in 1832 achieved another dubious distinction of being the first railroad locomotive explosion in the United States. And in 1834, when it was completed from Charleston to Hamburg, South Carolina, across the Savannah River, today from Augusta, Georgia, at 132 miles long, is the longest railroad in the world. And when the best friend of Charleston suffered that boiler explosion, they managed to put enough pieces of her back together again to reconstruct another locomotive, fittingly enough entitled the Phoenix, which continued in service up to the beginning of the war. Now, you folks, I probably don't need to explain this to you, but folks from other parts of the country, sometimes they need to hear. that if you're visiting Charleston and someone speaks to you about the war and you have to ask them which one, they know you're not from around here. The one that began here in April of 1861, 155 years ago this month, last week actually. And, you know, really, I think, if you think about it, gosh, this just makes sense. I really don't think any of you, who among you, raise your hand, who among you would go to Bunker Hill and ask somebody which war are you talking about? Who among you would go to the Alamo and ask a Texan, which war are you talking about? Who among you would go to Pearl Harbor and ask somebody there, which war are you referring to? The one that began here is the deadliest of all American conflicts. Between 620 and 750,000 soldiers and sailors perish in a span of 4 years. This is more than all other American wars put together, including World Wars I and II. The Vietnam conflict, which would go on for almost 2 decades, would see about 52,000 American sailors and service personnel, flyers and soldiers perish in that conflict. One of the other important firsts in Charleston you see across to the left is the Charleston Museum. Established in 1773, it was the first museum in America. And behind that truck, and we'll get a better view of it a little bit later, we're going to circle around, but you might be able to make out there the model that was a conjectural model made in the 1960s of the H.L. Hunley, the first submarine to sink an enemy warship in combat on the night of February the 17th, 1864. It's right behind that truck, but we are going to circle around and we will be able to see it better from the other side if you can't see it now. It would not be until 1914, the next time a submarine would sink a warship. 1864 to 1914. And in 2001, they raised the Hunley. You see, it never returned from that attack after sinking the Union blockader Housatonic. It and its crew never returned to port from the Atlantic Ocean, where those blockades, where the blockade of Charleston and those Union blockaders were riding at anchor. And when they brought her up in 2001 and took her to the Warren Latch Naval Conservatory, where she is today in North Charleston on the site of the former United States Navy base, undergoing restoration, conservation, and archaeology. When they opened her up, they discovered a number of important facts about it. No one knows why the Hunley did not come back. There are 3 current theories that they give you when you go there and ask you, well, which one do you think? But the problem with all of them, and pardon the inevitable bad pun, is that none of them are airtight and none of them hold water. There's a big honking problem with each and every one of them. The first one is, well, they had taken it to the surface and it was swamped by a passing ship. They had taken her up to get air. Powered by a crew of 8 men turning a crankshaft 40 feet long and only 4.5 feet wide. That's the first thing that you notice when you see the actual item compared to this reconstruction, this conjectural model from the 1960s based on some sketches and a few diagrams. If not seated precisely so on the downstroke of that crankshaft, the men would scrape their knuckles on the opposite wall and on the upstroke would bang their knees. So it's much more compact than what you see here. The other thing is it is much more hydrodynamic in appearance. Rather than these bulging rivets that you see here, or we will see when the truck moves or we circle around, it had flush rivets, which did not exist back then. They had to be pounded, hammered in. And the prow is much more hydrodynamic, gracefully curved rather than the straight clipped-off shape that this model has. Reminding you immediately of it looks like a German U-boat. And those of us who are forward here can see the front end of that, but everyone will be able to see it when we circle around. So they say, well, it was swamped and it sank, and there was a hole in the front conning tower about the size of your fist or a grapefruit. Perhaps it was hit by a passing ship, or maybe it was damaged by gunfire. But in either case, it filled with water and it sank. Well, when they opened it up, everybody was still in their positions. The hatches were closed, and everyone was still sitting at their station. No one was moving to the hatches. It sank in only 40 feet of water. No one was moving to any of the hatches. And by examining the inside of the hull, they found accretions on the inside of dissolved salts and minerals, like on the inside of caves when those dissolve in water and then drip down and they harden over time with contact with air. It took 20 years before that submarine filled with water. Well, the second theory was they took her down to the bottom to wait for the change of tide, and while they were on the bottom, they ran out of air. Well, you know, what's the problem when you're running out of oxygen and the environment is building up with carbon dioxide? You begin to choke and gag. There's an immediate physical response that says, we're out of air, and we need to go to the top. And if somehow or other they had not been able to pump out the ballast tanks, still everyone's sitting in their positions, no one's at least trying to force the hatch open and make a swim for it. And if for some reason none of that would have worked, there was an emergency buoyancy keel of hundreds of pounds that all you had to do was to turn a couple of levers, a quarter turn, and it would pop them to the surface like a cork. Levers are still in the lockdown safety position. Well, that 200 pounds of powder that they rammed into the hull, the Housatonic, detonated prematurely, and the shock wave concussed everybody and rendered all 8 of the crew senseless to where none of them were able to operate those 2 levers. And yet they were so badly concussed that none of them were able to do that, and yet none of them are thrown out of their position from the forward to the aft. None of the rivets are popped. None of the plates are cracked. No one has any broken bones. No fractured skulls. And yet no one's even able, not one of them is able to release those latches. They're all still sitting in their positions. Some of history is still a mystery. I have no idea what happened, but none of those theories hold water. So we'll pull forward and make a left-hand turn. And as we do, we're leaving behind on our right-hand side, which you will see once again as we circle around, the Joseph Manigault House. And this is an important house in Charleston from the early Adam period, or Federal style, the early part of the 1800s, and we'll see it again as we swing around. But this is also where historic urban preservation in America began. And the economy of the city was devastated by the war, did not fully recover for more than 100 years. And so in the 1920s, things were crumbling, including that house. It had been divided into a boarding house. Standard Oil of New Jersey wanted to purchase it, tear the house down, and put up an automobile tire store there. And the city fathers felt, you know, if this automobile thing ever catches on one day, we ought to be prepared to ride it. We got a lot of old houses falling down. We don't have any business here. Well, a determined group of ladies, led by Susan Pringle Frost, the first woman to be licensed as a realtor in South Carolina, pooled their own resources to purchase that house and to keep it together as best they could, never getting any of their resources back until the Charleston Museum could acquire it, who operates it today, and they operate it as a museum house. One of the other museum houses in Charleston, there's about a half dozen today. You see the Aiken Red House here, circa 1820. This is where Jefferson Davis stayed in his visit in 1863 to be beyond the range of the Union bombardment of the city, which lasted more than 580 days. And as we turn left at this intersection, you'll notice to the right the back of the carriage and stable house, across the wall, the cookhouse, and quarters above it. This is the most intact example of an antebellum urban compound anywhere in America. It would take between 1 and 2 dozen people to staff a house like that. And so this still has those workstations of the stable, the carriage house, the cookhouse, and the quarters for those enslaved workers that maintained that mansion. There are 3 trees that commonly grace our streets here downtown in Charleston, the live oaks that we've been passing around for the last several stretches, that we call live oak because they have green leaves on them all year round, even though you can see on either side there's a profusion of brown leaves that they have dumped. They do drop their leaves twice a year, in the spring and in the fall, in preparation for their summer and winter canopies, but they never go bare. They always have a full canopy of green leaves on them all year round. On the inside, on the left, behind that iron fence that you see there, you see Spanish moss hanging from that tree. And Spanish moss is neither Spanish nor moss. It's an epiphyte. It has no roots like moss. It's not a parasite. It takes all of its nourishment from the air and the rainwater. It's an air plant, like an air fern. And being a bromeliad, botanists assure us, because I certainly would have no way of knowing, but while studying for the exam, 200 question written followed by an oral examination if you pass the written, studying the botany section for that exam, I saw where botanists do tell us that as a bromeliad, it is the only native North American relative of the pineapple. Go figure. I can't. I guess it's like me and my brother. You know, one is soft, has no roots, and hangs from trees. The other is hard and spiky and grows out of the ground. But my mother assures me that nonetheless we are intimately related somehow. You see more examples of it off to our left now. And as we pass the Charleston Museum, beyond the marker, once again off to the left, you will see the Hunley model from the 1960s. That blunt, straight brow that it has under that spar mounting the charge of powder. Not at all what the actual item looks like. Graceful curved prow like a German U-boat, a smooth hull without those bulging rivets. Much more compact than what you see there. And now here the Joseph Manigault house, again off to the left. And for a while they sold off all the bits of land around it just to raise money. And Esso had a gas station here at this corner, and they used that Garden Gate Temple building there as the station's bathroom. Now we are passing the highest elevation in the city of Charleston now. To our left 20 feet. If oxygen masks should deploy, please continue just to breathe normally. We are descending now to our more average elevation of 10, and it'll be a right-hand turn at this intersection. And off to our right, Citadel Square Baptist Church to our left, and off to our right is Marion Square, named for Revolutionary War hero in South Carolina, patriot and native General Francis Marion, whom the British dubbed the Swamp Fox because of their hit-and-run guerrilla partisan warfare. Today, he would be described in the press as a leader of an insurgency. And the British said trying to track him in those vast stretches of cypress swamp between Charleston and Georgetown, north of here where he operated, was like trying to go on a fox hunt in a swamp. Off to the right, you see the original location of the Citadel. First constructed in 1822, the arsenal at that location, and then 20 years later became the Military College of South Carolina. In 1922, it moved to its present-day location that we'll be visiting shortly. This is Calhoun Street, and in colonial times was called Boundary Street. King Street, we're approaching again, directly in front of us. This was the city limit. Boundary Street, King Street, the only way in and out of the city on the peninsula. This was where the city gate was at that time. And you'll notice through the trees, you might be able to barely see it, what looks like a big hunk of gray rock behind a metal fence. Well, if you look out at the sidewalks, you see the slate flagging, the granite curbs. We don't have stone here in the Low Country. Those sidewalks come here from New England. And that, what looks like a big chunk of rock is tabby. That's the sole remaining piece of the largest tabby structure anywhere in the world. It was also the largest piece of military engineering ever built by the British in colonial America to protect that city gate. Halfway of the last block into half of this block and half a block north and south of us on the left and the right, the hornwork. So, because we don't have stone here and don't have crushed rock or gravel for concrete, but because we do have wonderful habitat in these slow-moving broad rivers with salt marsh where they meet the coast for shellfish, shrimp, crab, and oyster, by taking oyster shell and burning it for lime as you would limestone. You produce lime and then mixing it with water and sand, and some early recipes even called for molasses as an additional binding agent. Mixing that with oyster shell instead of gravel or crushed rock, you create tabby. And that is the sole remaining piece of the largest tabby structure ever in the world, the largest piece of British engineering from colonial times. This is the College of Charleston, the old Park campus here off to our right. Present day enrollment of about 10,000. 3 of the 4 signers of the Declaration of Independence for South Carolina were chartering members of the college. 3 of the 4 signers of the Constitution for South Carolina were also chartering members of the College of Charleston, which was America's first fully municipally funded institution of higher learning. Granting graduate degrees today, it still uses the historic moniker of College of Charleston. They like to say in their marketing materials that with every degree they confer, you receive a free degree in history. We're going to be turning right at the next intersection, and as we approach it, past these modern structures on our right, you're going to see 3 antebellum houses in a row that are now sorority houses. And so I think it may help, lessen some of Papa's anxiety separation to know that his little princess is not going to be going off and staying in some ratty dorm with the rest of the unwashed herd like my college experience, but in one of those antebellum houses perhaps, or if not, then maybe one in this row of Victorians that we're going to see up here on our left in just a moment. On the opposite side from these Victorians on the left, you see Grace Episcopal Church. You may remember that there was a seismic event which shut down the Washington Monument for quite a long time. That same tremor caused the sanctuary of Grace Episcopal Church here to our right to be closed for a year. And we'll make a right-hand turn at this intersection, and as we do on the inside of this right corner, you're going to see what we call a double house. So we'll see other examples later, but it is double house because it has 2 rooms fronting on the street. Now, on either side of us, we're going to see many examples of Charleston's much more representative signature style of urban residential architecture, the single house, with a single room on the street, the narrow end turned to the street, and then the long side with the piazza, the covered porch that runs the entire length of the long side, always to the south on north-south streets to catch the breeze coming in off the river and the harbor, always on the west on east-west streets to shade the house from the summer sun. And you'll notice the door on the street does not enter the house, it enters the piazza. So this is what we call a screen or privacy door, like a dressing screen to screen you from the street. And then the entrance The entrance to the house is after the first room, the single room on the street. You make a 90-degree turn into the middle of the house, and there is a single room to your left and to your right when you go in the entrance down the middle of the piazza. The piazza doesn't go all the way the entire length of the building. That's because the back is a modern addition. Or they've closed in the back of the piazza for bathrooms. To our right, you're going to see two more single houses. And you'll notice the metal washers or discs on the outside. That's because in 1886, the most powerful seismic event ever experienced in the eastern part of North America had its epicenter about 20 miles from Charleston. The Great Charleston earthquake was felt from Cuba to Canada and as far away as Chicago. Calculated to have been between the 7.1 and the 7.3 today, it destroyed many buildings throughout the city and it damaged them all to some extent. Many of the buildings, the walls were falling off. And so they punched threaded metal rods, two different rods threaded at each end, through the building from opposite sides, in the joist space between the floor and the ceiling, and connecting them in the center with a turnbuckle to pull those rods together. Now, of course, they would travel right through the wall if you didn't cap them on the outside. So those washers or plates are put on the outside to gain purchase against the wall, and then a threaded nut screwed over that. The Bethel Methodist Church here from the 1850s, the oldest Methodist church in South Carolina, was the original wooden one from the 1790s. They moved it to the back on rollers while building that one. And then in the 1870s, they moved it over here and put that portico and columns on it. They gave it to the African American members of their congregation to use as their own house of worship. So we're moving through the western side of the peninsula now, the leeward side, away from the action of the Atlantic, coming in to the harbor. This was the low-lying area of ponds and creeks, mud flats, and tidal marsh. 40% of the city of Charleston is built on reclaimed land. Only Boston a higher percentage than that in the U.S. And you see another double house here on this corner off to our left, and it has a basement. As you can imagine, the water table here is just a few inches below the surface of the ground, especially on the western side of the city. And so basements were deep south, where people there manufactured all the uniforms for men of the Confederacy who would serve, of South Carolina, who would serve in the Army of the Confederate States of America. Now on either side of us here ahead, you see examples of the typical urban retail architecture called the corner store. Literally set at a corner, 45 degrees, so people have access equally from either direction. And at the apex, there would be a cast iron column. This one has been removed for conservation purposes here. You see there's a wooden support there right now. But a cast iron ornamented column that would support the floors above there at the apex of that angle. You see other single houses that we're passing on either side of us now. Very clearly you see how the piazza is faced to the south, and the door there at the piazza on the street that admits you to the piazza, and then past that first single room, another single room after that entrance, that 90-degree turn off of the piazza into the house. You see smaller versions that are called freedmen's cottages. They were built for the substantial population of African Americans who lived here in Charleston, a majority African American city by the early 1700s, after the conclusion of the war. That's what this is over to the left there. It looks like a smaller version. It's a freedman's cottage. This one that we see here with the Rust-Oleum red roof as well. It's been heavily modified. Oh dear. All right. Well, take the very first left that we can, and then the very first right that we can after that. Now, of course, this is a one-way here, so we're going to have to cross this intersection. And you'll notice another example of Freedman cottages here in this neighborhood. The live oak example that we're passing under now, and that you see others here in front of us, when it is not pruned, the limbs will grow all the way back down to the ground and then grow back up again. Just like some of us, as we get older, our limbs begin to droop and we need a little additional stability. The live oak is not one of the taller growing species, but it does grow very broad. Only natively within 50 miles of the coast. And so when those branches grow back down to the ground, they act as an additional basis of support during storms and high winds, enabling it to keep from being blown over and toppled. And the largest is about 20 miles south of Charleston, called the Angel Oak. It's on the property of the Angel Oak. Yeah, because this T-bone's here, once again, one way going the wrong direction. So we're going to need to pass up one more street. And it is so massive, it has so many of those large limbs that have reached the ground and begun to grow back up again, that it looks like a grove of a half dozen freestanding trees, even though it is one single massive tree. And it is estimated to have been 1,000 years old when Columbus made his arrival in 1492. So we'll see. It plays an important role in American history. I'm sure you've all just been really just agog over celebrating the conclusion, the bicentennial of the conclusion of the War of 1812. You're probably still just packing up your decorations. But in that conflict, it was used essentially to construct the new American Navy. The first designed ships of the American Navy, the super frigates, the battle cruisers of their time. The most important or well-known example is permanently moored in Boston Harbor, the USS Constitution. And because with those limbs, with the many twists and shapes and how they will even grow back down to the ground, a ship's carpenter could literally take a ship's curves out into the field, or really out into the woods, and find in the living wood the shapes in this dense oak of the knees and the ribs that he needed to construct those hulls. Now I'm going to switch story for a moment because I want you to see growing on these limbs. Off to the left, you see what looks sort of like brown fur on these limbs here. Within 24 hours of a rain, that will be as green and lush as any ferns that you see in a walk in the woods. And so we call that resurrection fern, because right now it looks like it's dead, but then it comes back to life. And so it's called resurrection fern, and that's common to see on the limbs of many of them as well. So because of those shapes, the ribs and the knees and the braces of a ship's hull could be cut out of that living wood rather than having to steam and bend and weaken timber to create those curves. And you'll see directly ahead of us limbs that are growing all the way down to the ground. And you'll see as we make this turn, the trunk of the tree beyond these shrubs here to our left as we make this turn is actually quite some distance from those limbs, the outside of the canopy. And once you've steamed and bent wood, it's permanently weakened. So when the British fired on the Constitution, their cannonballs bounced off and they exclaimed, "Blimey, she must have sides of iron," giving her her nickname, Old Ironsides. No, she had a hull of southern live oak. You see there the bandstand, the only remaining part of the Carolina and West Indian Expo that was held here in 1901. Since 1791, this circular course that we're going around had been the Washington racetrack of the Carolina Jockey Club. But then in 1901, they opened this exhibition to try to stimulate business and visitors and industry here to Charleston, broadly modeled on the Chicago Expo of the quadricentennial of Columbus's voyage to the New World. Copying that great white city, there was an ivory city here. And that same wedding cake style architecture built of plaster and lath, the exhibition halls and meeting spaces. It was a cold, wet spring. The ticket sales were very slow. The exhibition closed, went bankrupt, and the city created this park here. And the lagoons that you see today were part of the Venice of the South, where gondolas would take people on rides during that exhibition. The Liberty Bell was on exhibit here. President Roosevelt was a guest. But nonetheless, financially, it was a flop. The city acquired this section of the property. The exposition went far the other direction, both directions as well, and hired Frederick Law Olmsted's adopted son to design the park. Frederick Law Olmsted, of course, was the architect for Central Park in Manhattan. You see this fine line of magnolias on the inside that we've been passing here. Of course, in about a month, they will bloom with those huge, fragrant white blossoms. To the right, and then in the gate of the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina, established 1842, the original arsenal built downtown 1822, and then moved to this suburban location of 600 acres, 1922. Hard to believe it's been here almost 100 years. You know, 2022 is not that far away. We'll make a right-hand turn, and as we do, to the left, you will see the reproduction of the class ring with the year 16 there. It's updated every year. And below that, 1842, the year of its establishment. The actual item is just a little bit smaller than the one that you see there. It's considered to be quite an entree, almost like a Masonic ring. I guess you could compare it to wearing the ring, simply as it's just referred to here. As you can imagine, this is quite a legacy institution where people's fathers, grandfathers have attended. And if we can get by this vehicle on the right and then pull in behind this bus on the left, we'll get off here for about 15 minutes. Now, for folks who would like to go inside the chapel, I will be going in there and speaking about the history of the institution. I'll be answering any questions and speaking about the present day institution.
It was Brother Hurt's grandson.
I got that little slip on film there. It's beautiful here. See that old tank over there? Way over there. Hey, there's a jet over there too. Get a good shot of the tank and the plane.
Here today among the Corps of Cadets, and so many of them are commissioned as officers through ROTC once they finish their graduation. Many come here for a business degree and go directly into business and civilian life wearing the ring. Engineering or civil engineering, as you would expect from a military college, and history are also frequently conferred degrees. Each of the battalions of the Corps has their barracks here off to the right. As we go by the gates of each, you'll see the drill plaza on the interior, the heavy columns and round Romanesque style arches. Off to the right, as we make this next left, you'll see inside this barracks again as well. And then the AH-1 attack helicopter of the United States Army from the 1970s, like the F-4 as well. The barracks are pretty kind of Spartan dormitory type of, it's not a large open barrack like a military barrack that might have hundreds of people inside in one large room. It's multiple, and I don't know whether it's 4 or 6 or how many to, a room. But it's kind of like a college dormitory room. Many historians credit Citadel cadets with firing the first shot of the Civil War. In 1861, President James Buchanan, during the lame duck days of his administration, made the decision to send an unarmed civilian steamer, feeling that would be less provocative, the Star of the West, in an attempt to sneak reinforcements and supplies into Fort Sumter, where Major Anderson, with his garrison of fewer than 100 men, had only a few months of supplies available to them now. And of course, folks, it didn't take WikiLeaks in 1861 for people to know what was going on. When a ship in New York is being loaded with soldiers and munitions, and every day the reporters from the New York newspapers are there at the docks filing their stories. Everybody knew where that ship was going, and they knew the day that it left New York, and they knew how many days it takes to get from New York to Charleston. Citadel cadets were ready and waiting for them on Morris Island outside the entrance of the harbor, manning a sand battery of guns, firing on the Star of the West, and its civilian captain concluding that getting a war started was above his pay grade, turned it around and took it back to New York. And then President Buchanan, like Pontius Pilate, would wash his hands of the entire affair and say, "Old Dave, this is going to be up to you. You take care of it." You know, President Buchanan was adamantly anti-Republican, and he said, "It's you Republicans, Abraham Lincoln, and the first Republican president, that got us in this situation here. You're going to have to figure out what you're going to do about it." And so that was it until the inauguration once again in March. And with this road closure ahead here, yeah, it looks like he's letting, that's just a stop and like he's letting people through. Okay, let's continue here then. The tide looks like it's in because the water is high here. It is still connected to the river and still rises and falls with the rise and fall of the tide in the river. And in this area, the suburb that was called the Charleston Village, in colonial times this was the recreation area. This was the pleasure grounds. And in 1786, a group of Scotsmen formed the first golf club in America. And it was it has no wood grain. This is the Coast Guard station since World War I. That large building there, the sole remaining part of the former mill, and those washers on the outside of those pilasters, once again from the earthquake rods and bolts. The seawall was constructed here in 1911. This is the Ashley River to our right, and beyond it, James Island. After Long Island, all of the largest islands along the east coast of the United States are located in South Carolina, James Island being one of those, between here and Hilton Head. So prior to this seawall, this area to the left of us, the boulevard that we're cruising on now, was all water or mud flats or tidal marsh and creeks. And the land was filled in first from the direction that we're headed toward. So this is the newest part of that land that we're riding on now. You'll see this house here off to the left with the pig statues there at the base of the steps. And that's because it's owned by a man who, before selling it off to Harris Teeter, owned the southeastern region chain of Piggly Wiggly grocery stores. And so you could say that's his homage to how he would bring home the bacon for this fine South of Broad address. The terracotta tile house we see off to our left here, the first built after the seawall was constructed. The Notebook and Queen were also filmed there. This house here with the white columns, there was a garage apartment behind it, rented by a young naval ensign when he was here in Charleston during the early days of U.S. participation in World War II. And I'm going to come back to that story in a moment because directly ahead of us is Fort Sumter, where the deadliest of all American wars began, about 3.5 miles away on the horizon there, at the entrance of Charleston Harbor, the entrance of the harbor a mile across to the left of it, Sullivan's Island, the land to the left, Morris Island on the horizon, the low-lying land to the right of Fort Sumter was where the Citadel cadets had their battery and turned back the Star of the West. And it was from there in 1863 that a bitter campaign was waged for control of Morris Island. The movie Glory, about the 54th Massachusetts, the 1st Regiment of black soldiers recruited in the North and officered by white abolitionists from New England, is primarily about their participation in that campaign. Although in the movie they do nothing to put it in a military or geographic context. They might as well have been fighting for Gilligan's Island, for all you can tell in the movie. But from there, 3.5 miles from Charleston is Fort Sumter. Artillery of the Confederacy, and for most of the war, only had a maximum maximum range of 2 miles. Had a maximum range of 2 miles, but the most powerful long-range siege artillery in the world that all the industrial might of northern industry could manufacture began to arrive on Morris Island with a range of 4.5 miles and brought the city of Charleston under bombardment for more than 500 days and poured 7 million pounds of projectiles directly from Morris Island into Fort Sumter, making it the most bombarded piece of real estate in the entire Western Hemisphere, which it remains to this very day, and effectively speaking, shooting it down to half of the height that it originally was. Now we're going to stop here for just 5 minutes. You need to turn, once again, the engine off. It's a $1,092 fine for idling here. Confederate defenders of Fort Sumter here off to the left. Tell them that is an allegorical representation. Women did not wear those funny hats, and men did not go off to battle naked with stubby swords. The largest gun in the Confederacy was in battery here at this intersection, directly ahead of us where these people are crossing now. Go ahead, blow the horn real loud, no, and scare the bejesus out of this woman because she's a friend of mine and it'll give her a heart attack. It came through the blockade from England at great expense and hazard. And so when they evacuated the city, they packed it full of powder and they blew it up, and a 500-pound piece of it flew through the air and crashed through the roof of this one here with the white columns, wedging itself in the rafters of the attic, where it remains to this day. And in 1989, when Charles, Prince of Wales, was a guest in that house, I can't help but imagine that at some point his host must have approached him with something along the lines of, "Charlie, what say we grab a couple of gin and tonics, go up in the attic, and I'll show you this piece of cannon from England I've got up there." It must have been for some charming cocktail chit-chat. The house here off to our left is where that young naval ensign had his desk job in 1942. The Navy had bought it to use for office space. You notice that we've been traveling uphill, leaving the low land of White Point behind. This is the bluff now ahead of us where the English moved their settlement in 1670. Their original site had been up the Ashley River, across from where the Citadel is today, up a shallow creek where they spent the first 10 years before then moving to this location of deep water and building that wall around it. The last street that we left behind in the low ground is Water Street today. It was a creek, and it was the natural southern moat. The market, where you're going to be spending your time after this tour, was a creek and the natural northern moat. And you see the streets off to the right are called wharf, and they're paved in cobblestones, which came as ship's ballast, because everything to the right of us was water. The ships tied up where the buildings are today. The streets were the wharves, and the sidewalk was where the fortified seawall, 7 million locally produced brick, was where the sidewalk is today. Off to the left, you see Rainbow Row, Charleston's picture postcard. Location, the longest row of 18th century buildings anywhere in the United States. All the colors of the rainbow in this Caribbean-influenced pastel colors. We'll be turning left onto Broad Street once more, and as we do, to the right, you see the Old Exchange building. The Old Exchange is considered to be one of the 3 most historically significant buildings in America from the colonial period. It's one of only 4 still standing where the Constitution was ratified. It's the last governmental building built by the English prior to the Revolution, and it's where George Washington would have addressed the citizens of Charleston from behind the rail where those folks are standing right now. And he arrived on the water side. That would have been the formal entrance into the city, there on the water side. And he keeps a journal of his visit to Charleston, a week-long visit, the many entertainments that he was shown while he was here. And of course, George Washington loved to dance. Washington was a dancing fool. You know, if there had been Dancing with the Presidents in 1791, he would have been the hands-down winner every week. And he records in his journal that while he was here for that week, he danced with 256 handsome women. of the city of Charleston. You notice the tower of St. Michael's Church ahead of us there, and it has that angle or lean to it to the right-hand side, because in that earthquake of 1886, that tower during those tremors sank 8 inches into the ground. As we cross this intersection to our right-hand side, looking up the street, you'll see where Church Street gets its name. St. Philip's, the original congregation of the settlement, originally at the location of St. Michael's. But as the settlement expanded, St. Philip's moved to that uptown location, and a second parish of the Church of England, St. Michael's, was established here a couple of decades later on its original site. We're making a right-hand turn now onto Meeting Street, which was the western end of the old walled city. This was where the drawbridge was, here, this intersection. And this intersection is what Mr. Ripley of Ripley's, believe it or not, nicknames the four corners of law. We have City Hall, county courts, federal court, and the highest law on the other corner. City, county, federal, and divine, the four corners of law. The next street off to our right is Chalmers Street, which is the longest cobblestone street in Charleston. Hibernian Hall here to the left. Those columns and that portico came down in the earthquake of 1886. The Mills House Hotel here off to our left. That suite of rooms by that balcony there on the corners where Robert E. Lee was staying in 1861 when he witnessed the great fire that roared across the city of Charleston and burned Institute Hall here on our right, where the Ordinance of Secession was signed, the building that burned in that fire of 1861. And while here in the Holy City, Robert E. Lee, as did George Washington, as did the Marquis de Lafayette, as did Charles, Prince of Wales, all worship in St. Michael's Church. When you go in today, you put your hand on top of the rail of Pew Box 43, the Guest of Honor box. That's where all those eminent gentlemen had their hand while letting themselves in and out of Guest of Honor box 43. The Charleston Market and the Confederate Museum there, when you see the flag, the museum is open. It has uniforms and weapons and documents and relics, including a lock of Robert E. Lee's hair. As close as you get to the true cross here in the South. Excellent area there for dining and shopping as well. And you'll notice, as you saw when we went by, examples of what we call Charleston sweetgrass baskets. Now, this colony differed from other English colonies by the fact, I've pointed out some things already, but by the fact that the first ship of settlers did not come directly from England. They came from Barbados, where they had wintered over, and many of the early settlers came from the British Islands and the Caribbean. There is a pronounced Caribbean influence to the city still today. You saw those Caribbean pastel shades of Rainbow Row. It had been their intention to literally transplant to the mainland of North America the sugar plantation economy and society that existed in Barbados, where the planters there were the billionaires of their age, the Bill Gates and the Donald Trumps of their time. Sugar did not work in this area. They exported skins, buckskin and doeskin breeches, because leather pants for men were all the rage in England, up to 50,000 a year from far away as the Mississippi River. Indigo was an important export as well until the British subsidies for that ended. But what would make Charleston the fourth largest city in the 13 English colonies and the richest per capita, that became the staple export commodity by the early 1700s, making this a majority African-American city and colony, was rice. Charleston became one of the largest rice exporting cities in the entire world. China, India, Japan. In 1775, 9 of the 10 wealthiest men in colonial America were South Carolina rice planters. Now, the vast majority of enslaved Africans would go to the sugar plantations. African slavery is not a Southern invention. It's not an American innovation. It's not something that in the 1790s, after Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, suddenly Africans were brought to pick cotton. For approximately 300 years, about 12 million Africans were sold to the English, the Dutch, the Spanish, and the Portuguese. The vast majority of them for the sake of European sweet tooths, mainly going to the sugar plantations. 5 million alone to Brazil and places like Jamaica and Cuba and Dominican Republic and Haiti. 500,000 went to the island of Barbados alone. That's as many as all that came to North America. But of those, about 200,000 would pass through the port of Charleston. About 40%, meaning many African Americans today have an ancestor who passed through the port of Charleston. Now, rice culture was unknown to Europeans of the 17th century, but on the west coast of Africa. It's about 900 miles going out the harbor due east until you reach Bermuda, and then nothing after that for 2,400 miles into the west coast of Africa. The bulge in the map, if you picture it in your mind's eye. Where today we talk about the Gold Coast and the Ivory Coast, they describe a rice coast of Gambia and Senegal, where Africans had been raising rice since the time of the Roman Empire. And so they brought with them not just a source of labor, but their knowledge and their skill that made this wealth possible. So in addition to bringing the knowledge, the skill of their foods, there's quite an influence here still today, whether directly from Africa or indirectly from the Caribbean. Our word gumbo comes from the West African word for okra, for example. But they also brought their crafts associated with it as well. And so baskets like those Charleston sweetgrass baskets you find only one other place in the world outside of the Low Country, the west coast of Africa. They're not straw, they're not woven. They're local sweetgrass, bulrush, and longleaf pine needle that are fashioned into coils and then sewn or stitched together with strips of palmetto thread. So they make great souvenirs. You're not going to find them at the Walmart in Paducah. And they make fabulous wedding gifts. My wife and I never have to worry about, honey, do you have the receipt in case she wants to take it? And the other 3 or 4 she got that the Bed Bath & Beyond exchange it for a food processor. That's not going to happen. These will be passed down like grandmother's quilt from generation to generation, become prized family treasures. Now, in addition to history and architecture and sightseeing, what makes Charleston a favorite place to visit for so many people also includes things like shopping and dining. So I've mentioned some things about shopping in the sweetgrass baskets. The signature dish here in the city of Charleston, and of course you're going to expect to find seafood, and you will be able to find deep-fried popcorn shrimp here the same as you could as a Captain D's in Louisville. But the dish you don't find anywhere else, unlike a Coney dog or Chicago pizza, is Charleston she crab soup. I just want to point out this facade is Bennett's Rice Mill. It was the first steam-powered. It was an important piece of antebellum industrial architecture. Here on the deep water, those ponds did not exist up against the action of the harbor from the ocean coming in, but this was where the ships were anchored. So the mills were on the lee side where the water was calm and shallow, and the ships were on the east side where the water was turbulent and deep. So Mr. Bennett constructed a steam power mill to process his rice. In the 1950s, Hurricane Donna came through after all the wood had been removed from that derelict structure, people from being a fire hazard to people who might be camping out in there. Before the structural steel could be put in place to support the facade. 5/6 of it, 3 of the 4 walls were knocked down in that hurricane. So it's just that front facade that we have today. But she crab soup is a bisque or thick cream soup with the meat of Atlantic blue crab, topped with a generous dollop of sherry, and then garnished with crab roe, the tiny, light orange round pellets that you see inside of it are crab egg. And so for that reason, a he crab is not sufficient, but a she crab is required. And I do have, for anyone who would like one, they are good for one table or a party of up to 4 for one pre-appetizer to be able to split to a restaurant, that if any of you would like them, I have them here. You can pick them up by the door as you go out. What time do people need to be back to meet the bus? You need to be back at 3 o'clock to meet the bus. So by the time it's 2:30, you really need to start.
They bloom from the middle of May to the middle of July. The blooms are about the size of salad plates. They're creamy white and extremely fragrant, having somewhat of a citrusy scent. These yellow blooms right here is a Lady Bankshire rose bush. This is a thornless rose bush that only blooms in the spring, and they look really beautiful. I've had several in my yard, and we just kind of let them go wild, and they eventually kind of look like a fountain in the yard when they bloom in the spring. So beautiful. We have just a few little azaleas blooming here and there. Most of the azaleas have finished blooming. Up this lane on our left, we have a blue-green building. It's going to be a little hard with the sun in your eyes a little bit there, but it's back there. That's what used to be the stables. It's now an area that we call the carriage house. We have numerous weddings, receptions, and other events there. Beyond it is the Ashley River. We'll see more of the river in just a little bit. And then there in that grassy clearing is a 500-year-old Virginia live oak. That tree is about 31 feet in circumference. And the tree was hollow for a long time. All this land surrounding us right now used to be fields. And when the slaves would be out here working in the fields, they built fires inside that tree hollow so they could stay warm during the day. But at any rate, the arborists came quite a few years ago. They sealed up the tree, and there will not be any more fires inside the tree hollow. Now, the tree didn't burn up because it's a live oak tree. The wood's extremely dense, and it does not burn well at all. Magnolia Plantation was established by Stephen Fox in 1676. Stephen had left England because it was crowded and noisy, and he decided he wanted to go to the Barbados. But Stephen soon found out that the Barbados was very noisy and crowded, so he came here where he purchased about 2,000 acres. That same year, Thomas Drayton Jr. did exactly the same thing, except Thomas never purchased any property. Thomas, however, fell in love with Anne. Her father was Stephen Fox. Anne and Thomas married after dating a couple of years, and upon their marriage, she received this entire plantation as part of her dowry. They spent about 8 to 10 years building a house, and during this time, they experimented with numerous crops like sugar cane, ginger, oranges, olives, and eventually they began to grow rice here. Many trees here when they first got the land, maybe more. But everything had to be removed by hand. Using axes and cross-cut saws, they felled the trees, and then they still had to dig the stumps, the roots, any other bush, shrub, or vine. They had to smooth the land out so they could plant the rice, and they had to form the dikes that we're now riding on that separate the rice fields. They had to contend with the weather and all the wildlife that's here. Lots and lots of alligators. And we have supposedly 6 varieties of poisonous snakes, and fox, bobcat, possum, raccoons, and then our weather. For those of us that live around here, we really feel like we have summer-like weather for about 9 to 10 months out of the year. It will not be quite as hot at times, but it does get rather warm. But the humidity is horrible. Winters are fairly short and moderate. We don't have a lot of ice and snow, but we do have a lot of standing water. And with that comes lots and lots of mosquitoes. On our left over here, this is called Ravenswood Pond. My goodness, look at all the great egrets out there and gulls and things flying around. They're having a good time this morning. Those are the great egrets moving. Now we've got a number of wooden ramps in the water. The wooden ramps are put in the water for the alligators, but they get used by absolutely everything. Now we don't have many ducks here at Ravenswood Pond any longer. Most of them have migrated and gone back home where they came from. We got just a small handful, and we've got several mama wood ducks. I see one of them up ahead here. Her babies are about half grown. But the ducks love the green stuff that you see on top of the water. This is supplied by Mother Nature. We just simply call it duckweed. There's about 5 varieties. It is very tiny individual plants. The wind just pushes it together, and it looks like a blanket. But it's little tiny plants that are probably no more than maybe an inch long, and they got a little tiny root, and they just float on top of the water. They actually look like lily pads underneath the microscope. Now down here is our mama wood duck and her babies, and then there's a few wood ducks in the water. Her babies have gotten really good size. I see a turtle sitting over there in the water. That's a yellow-bellied pond slider. We should see a good many turtles before it's over with, I would think. But there's the babies on the ramp. You can see they're not little anymore. They're kind of half-grown. And then there's the some male wood ducks out there. They have that white pinstriping on their bodies. But the turtles, the ducks, the herons, and egrets, they all love sitting up on the ramps. This pond used to be a rice field, and back during the mid-1950s it was drained and it was dredged, and it was made considerable deeper. How deep, I really don't know the feet, but there's 3 islands on this pond, and all 3 of the islands were made from the soil that was brought up from the bottom of the pond. And we've probably got between 40 and 50 alligators that live in this pond, and we rarely see more than, I'd say 10 or maybe 15 at a time. Only once that I saw 37 one time, but it was after a really nasty day, and the next day was sunny and warm and beautiful, and the alligators just came out of the woodwork. They were everywhere out here that day. On our left in the water, we have a small ball cypress tree that has a large white bird in it. That is a great egret. And I'm not sure her babies may have hatched yesterday, because she stood up quite a bit yesterday, and normally she's sitting there. Got a little alligator swimming out. Got a little one on the ramp over there. He's up here, and I'm going to stop and let y'all all get a photograph if anybody wants one. Now, quite often you will see the turtles lying on the ramps with the very small alligators. Now, the turtles are one of the favorite foods of the alligator, but the mouth of the alligator has to be big enough to eat the turtle for the turtle to be in danger. And so quite often we'll see them resting together. And you see the mouth on that little alligator on the ramp is probably no more than 4 inches or so. It's not big at all. And some of these turtles can get to be 14 inches long. And so they're huge turtles, some of them. Of course, if it's a smaller turtle, yeah, the alligator could eat it, but not often does that happen. Now, the trees that are laying in the water here, we leave a lot of this laying. It kind of looks trashy to a certain degree, but it serves 2 purposes. It gives the little alligators and the turtles a place to sun themselves. And then it also gives the little alligators a place to hide. When little alligators are first hatched, they're only a few inches in length. They're preyed upon by egrets and herons. But they grow about 6 inches a year, and then they're preyed upon by other alligators. So these trees will serve as a little bit of protection for the little alligators. Sometimes maybe they can get in and around these branches and maybe not actually get caught for lunch. There's one laying right over there. You can see the back of his head. He's got his head to the back of us there. His snout is facing out to the center of the pond. He looks like just a little piece of wood laying out there. They're really hard to see sometimes when they're in the water because they do lay extremely still, hoping that you don't see them. That's how they get their prey, is they surprise the daylights out of them. Now we've got two in this pond that are huge. Brutus and Red October are probably every bit of 14 feet long and weigh over 1,000 pounds. They are tremendous alligators. But usually all we see are the little fellas. On our left over here is a good bit on the island, but it's really hard to see anymore because of the trees having leafed out. But around the base of the island, there's several great egret nests. You see those white birds scattered around the bottom. And then there are 9 great blue heron nests out there. If you look way to the top of the tree, that tallest tree, you can see something up there. You can see a little bit of some gray shadows. And then down below it on the right is another nest that you can see just a little bit. But they are very difficult to see. Their babies have gotten to be really good size. As a matter of fact, I can show you a little bit better. If you look like we got a fight going on the back of the island over there. I see wings are flapping. But there's 2 small trees in the background back there, and then a single tree on over to the right. If you look in the top right of that single tree, you can see some dark gray birds just kind of standing up there. Those are baby gray blue herons, and they are good size, like I say right now. Yeah, I think the egrets and the anhingas were kind of fussing over there. There's some blackbirds on that island as well. They're called anhingas, and we should see some more of those, and you'll be able to see them a little better further on. I'll tell you about them then. Now the alligators, they stay at the bottom of the pond. During the winter, the bottom of the pond is much warmer than the top of the pond. During the summer, the bottom of the pond is much cooler. So the alligators tend to stay at the bottom of the pond quite a bit. That's where they're comfortable. Now I'm not seeing any laying out just yet. Usually they lay over there on that bank over there where the sunlight's starting to hit. They'll come out of the water and they'll lay over there, but I don't see any even resting in the water right now. It's a little cool this morning for them. Alligators are really funny about hot and cold weather. They don't like either temperature much at all. They're kind of like Goldilocks, you know, they like it just right. Don't want it hot or cold. Now we're coming up behind the slave cabin. We have 4 cabins on the plantation. 3 of the cabins are identical. They have only 2 rooms per house. Each room has a fireplace that was used for cooking, heating, and for light. Behind this first house is an enclosed area. This is how they kept their gardens. They did this to keep the deer and the rabbits out. And it does work. Although that one is kind of falling down a little bit, it's seen its better day, I think. The third house in this row has 4 rooms. It was lived in as late as the mid-1960s by a mom and dad that had 18 children. This house on the end closest to us is the living room. The middle room is the kitchen, and there are only 2 very tiny bedrooms in this third house for 20 people. Nobody had their own room. Everything was shared. Can you imagine 20 folks being in something that small? It just kind of blows my mind, but it also goes back to a time when children behaved. They knew if Mama said something or Daddy said something, they best be quick about it. At least that's the way it was when I grew up. My goodness, we'd get in trouble real quick. This last house on our left used to be a smokehouse. They cured the meat by smoke in those houses. It was later converted into a gardener's cottage. And we're passing beneath the branches of about a 400-year-old Virginia live oak. Now these are massive trees. They say that there is as much root system underneath the ground as there is tree above the ground. That's what keeps these trees upright during the hurricanes that we have here. And hurricane season begins the 1st of June and it ends the last of November. These branches often rest on the ground. These have been trimmed up because we do have a lot of visitors over this way. So, I'll show you some at the end of our tour where they still are resting on the ground. Now, we've been having a mama Canada goose down here. Yeah, she's still over there. She's sitting on a nest. She's at the edge of the bank behind the trees over there. You can see her kind of tucked under down there. She's sitting on her eggs. This is about her 3rd week of sitting on her eggs. She raised 4 babies here last year. And we're looking for at least 3 or 4 more. Daddy Goose is somewhere out here. He's been hanging close by. I don't see him at the moment, but he's been known to kind of wander around everywhere. Hanging from the branches of the trees, you see a lot of gray material. This is called Spanish moss, but it is neither Spanish nor is it moss. It's actually an air plant. We got some guineas. Here's our 4 guineas. Those are some of the best bug-eating birds you can have if you can stand the noise. They are a noisy little bird. They make a heap of racket. They go and they just awesome, terrible noise. But they'll let you know if somebody's in the yard. Let me tell you, they alert you for sure. But at any rate, this moss, lots of people like to take it home as a souvenir. But you need to know that there's tiny little bugs that live in it. They're called red bugs or chiggers. And they bite like mosquitoes. Now, it's not a horrible bite. You just got a bump that itches like crazy.
Right.
And if you do handle the moss in a few hours, if you have a bug bite, just paint it with fingernail polish. That's what my mother did to us as we were growing up, and now trust me, it really does work. The polish peels off in about a day or so, but it smothers the chigger. On our right in the box planters, these bushy plants are banana shrubs. The blooms smell just like a freshly opened banana. It's just amazing how much they smell like bananas. The little tree with the several trunks, that is a crepe myrtle. Now all along the left here, we've got a lot of stumps that are coming from the root system of the bald cypress tree. These things are said to help the trees to breathe, and they grow extremely slowly. On our left out here, this is our tupelo swamp. The trees in the water are tupelo gum trees. Now the trees do look a little sad because they don't have many limbs on them, but that is due to all the moss that's hanging on the trees. It will stunt the growth of the trees if they become overladen with the moss. This swamp was also the site of a movie some of you may have seen called Swamp Thing. An old movie, very hokey horror movie. And then over there, that raised walkway, that is the entrance for the Audubon Swamp Garden. That is a self-guided walking tour, and I feel certain you guys probably are not doing a walking tour today. It's a lot of walking you can do around this place. Now, we've got a lot of azaleas on the plantation, but most of the azaleas have finished blooming. They have a very short bloom cycle. They only bloom about 10 to 14 days. But now, we do have some other azaleas that I'll show you towards the end of our tour that are what we call encore azaleas. They bloom several times a year, and they bloom several weeks each time that they bloom. So they do look mighty beautiful. We got a few of those that are still blooming as well. Now let's see. Well, they'll just have to wait. They're taking their time. Make sure they don't follow me. People often follow us out here when they see us cross the road. No, okay, he slowed down, but he didn't turn. I had a guy followed me halfway out here about 4 days ago. Anyway, Magnolia Plantation, we are noted to have the largest collection of camellias in the entire United States. We literally have thousands upon thousands of these plants. We have the Sanqua and we have the Japonica. And we only have one bush that I'm aware of that still has some blooms on it. And it also is towards the end of our tour, and I'll show it to you then. But now the rest of this tour is pretty much going to be through the wooded area. Out here also we see wild turkeys. The wild turkeys are quite difficult to see at times because of their brown coloring. Blend in extremely well with the shadows, the darkness of the tree trunks, and then of course the dense foliage out there. It makes it really hard to see them. The way you notice them is you look for movement. That's how you see the turkeys. We also have wild pigs on the plantation, but you won't ever see a wild pig. They are nocturnal. They only the large black bird that was at Ravenswood that I told you I'd tell you about later. This is one of those black birds. This is called Anhinga, A-N-H-I-N-G-A. It's commonly called a snake bird, and they call it a snake bird because of that long, skinny neck that you see. These birds can only stay in the water about 10 to 15 minutes because they have no oil in their feathers. So these birds, when they're swimming in the water from a distance, they look like a snake. That's how they got their name. These birds have extremely sharp beaks. They can pierce fish with their beaks, and they can actually catch fish with their beaks. And lots of times they catch fish that are way too big to swallow, and they simply hold the fish by the tail, and they beat the daylights out of the fish on the ramps out there. It is crazy to watch them whacking the fish over and over and over again. And then they swallow the fish head first. That way the fins don't catch in their throat as they swallow them. The birds will sit out until they get dry. They always put their backs to the sun. We got two more little alligators resting in the water right here, and there's a little bird over there called a grebe, a pie-billed grebe. It goes down to the bottom of the pond and pulls up grasses from the bottom of the pond. Now I'm going to move on down here a little quicker, so make up a little time. We got a couple of alligators down here. Now we've got a couple of really huge guys that have been hanging out here lately, but neither one of these are really huge ones, but these guys don't seem to come out until it gets a little warmer. Like now, for whatever reason. So there's a couple of alligators over there resting on the ramp. The average male alligator is about 14 feet long and will weigh about 1,000 pounds. The average female is approximately half of that. She's 7 to 10 foot long, and she'll weigh 600 to 700 pounds. Their tails make up about half their body length. So if you figure a 14-foot alligator, his tail is almost 7 foot long. And that tail is what propels them through the water, but it also, they can come straight up out of the water, half their body length. So if you're near an area, this pond is shallow, so they can't do it here. But if this pond were really deep, they could come up out of the water 7 foot right at you. They're very, very fast moving. They can swim about 10 to 14 miles an hour, which doesn't sound terribly fast, but you try running 10 to 14 miles an hour, one of them rascals chasing you. Oh my goodness. I might could flip it on up to 15 miles an hour. Here on my right, we have a crossing. This pond being so shallow gets really cold in the winter and really hot in the summer. The alligators do not like either one of those temperatures, as I said earlier. So here they come out of the pond and they go into the river here on our left between these two trees. Now you can't see too much of it because the tide is up, but they have them a slide wallowed out right there. It extends well out into the river, and they cross over the pavement, and they just hit their belly, and they do a belly slide right out into the river. It's just crazy. And they use it frequently. I've been here 3 years, and there's not grass growing on that slide at all. They keep it all rubbed off. At night, if you come out with a flashlight and you shine the light around, if the light bounces off of their eyes glow blood red. It is very creepy looking. Down here we have a few coots. The coots are the dark gray birds with a black head and a very white head. These birds are not ducks either. They have no webbing between their toes either. Oh, we got another alligator resting over here on our left. Haven't seen one over here in a while. So y'all are special. See laying over there? It's a pretty shot, laying there against those cattails.
Hold it.
Boy, that sun is beautiful and bright this morning. Now, alligators live really long lives. They can live to be at least 85 years old. And they say the reason they live so long is that they don't have predators. Yeah, I know, I said that that's really old, but it's not that it's that old, but it's old for an animal to live that long. Out in the wild, particularly. But that's why they do live so long, is that they do not have predators. There's nothing that literally hunts down alligators except us as humans. We're the only thing that's a predator to them. Now, they do take each other out. And I saw that about last Monday, I actually saw it. There was a huge alligator out here. And he rolled off of the ramp and he went swimming to the middle of the pond. He did a U-turn. There was a little alligator like this laying in the water. Man, he come full steam ahead and he just grabbed that little fella, hoisted him up in the air, and turned around and went back to the middle of the pond with him. It just blew my mind. I had never seen it, and I was told that I would see it eventually. And by cracky, I did. It just, hurt my feelings. That big old fat thing chasing down that little baby alligator. But it's still an alligator. Now, sometimes down here we have a mama alligator. Saw her yesterday, but it's a little early yet, so I kind of don't think she'll be out. And I don't see her anywhere. But we'll see what may be around the curve up here. We also have a zoo on the plantation. If you guys have time, stop by the zoo and visit the animals. We have a lot of what we call domestic animals, and then we've got a few others. That is a little snowy egret over there. I think that's a snowy egret. Couldn't see his head for a minute there, but I did then. Now, the zoo is located behind the cafe. We have chickens and ducks and geese, rabbits, goats, pot-bellied pigs. Oh, we have snakes. And we have deer. We have several deer in our enclosure. And Gracie is turning 5 this month. And she is one of the sweetest animals you'll ever come across. She loves people and she loves attention. So if you'd like to pet a real deer, run by the zoo and say hello. There's a new baby in the zoo, and that's the one I said was Gertrude. They named her Gertrude this year. She's somewhere close to a year old now, I think. Now, back at the beginning of the tour, I was telling you that the plantation was about 2,000 acres. That's not true any longer. During the Civil War, the house here was burned, and the family wanted to rebuild the house. But they were quite broke after the Civil War, so they sold 1,500 acres. That became the neighboring plantation of Drayton Hall, and Magnolia is now only about 500 acres. Coming up on our left is a 3-story observation tower. This tower was put out here for the public to enjoy, and depending on how long you have, and if you want to, walk out here and climb this tower. It's quite a sight to look out over the marsh and the river out there. use this trail right here. It comes from the back of the house. It takes only about 5 minutes to walk out here. Not bad at all. Now over to the left is the back of the romantic garden. Out there is where those encore azaleas are that I was telling you about. These gardens were designed by Reverend Drake. He wanted to create an earthly paradise. And the donkey. You see that peacock over there? We've got one that's kind of a soft beige color, and that's that one there. Is there room here? Don't have that far to walk. Climb on you. I don't think I've got enough room for you to climb on there.
That's all right.
All right. This is where those live oak trees, you see the branches resting on the ground right here. They do not, however, take root from where they rest on the ground. On our left over here, we have our horticultural maze. It's a lot of fun to ramble around in there and find your way out. That maze is a copy of one that was done for King Henry VIII many, many, many years ago. Coming up on our left is our last pond. This is our White Ridge Pond. This is one of the most photographed areas in the southeastern United States. You can walk across the bridge if you like. One end of the trail comes out right over there, and the other end of the trail is at the side of the house. Now I'm going to stop right here at the driveway to let you folks exit. It is a little slopey, and I see the sprinklers going out there in the grass, so I'm going to let y'all off over here at the driveway. That way you won't get wet. Just leave the blankets, throw them on the seats or wherever, and I'll collect them in just a little bit.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome aboard.
Is there a place to sit?
My name is Doug. I'm a volunteer with the National Park Service, and we'll be joined today by Liz, one of our interns. She's going to be giving you a live history talk on the way out to the
Linda,
fort
you sit
today.
right there.
It will take us about half an hour to motor out to Fort Sumter. We'll spend an hour at the fort once we're there, and then a half hour coming back. Yeah, believe it or not, we come back in the same time it takes us to go out. If you did not get a Fort Sumter brochure as you came through Liberty Square, we do have a limited number on board. We'll be walking around afterwards and outfit you one. Ask that you just take one per family or per group if you would please. Ranger Antoine's at the fort today. There's always a surprise as to what extras you might get when you get out there in the way of talks or information. The main thing is ask questions. If you've got a question about anything, that's what we're here for, is to help you understand what it is that you're seeing out there today. So again,
inside sometimes. When you get a chair, you also tell them
big one.
Lift that.
Takes a couple men, I imagine. huge cannon sit there. Go down. No, can't go down right now. As we drop into Savannah, Georgia. We're at the Visitor Center in Savannah, Georgia.
this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. And I'm going to tell you something. Me and this church, you're going to have people of work.
It's just interesting, an old station, cultivation station. Oh, look at the teapots. Please take a picture of the teapots.
It's a little girls.
I'm a little teapot, short and stout.
Yes, you are. Georgia peaches.
Coastal Jazz Association.
Hall of Fame.
It's in here. That's what I said. That's what I was thinking. I wonder if we needed in the restaurant, but we decided we would go ahead and keep it if we did. You know, we didn't take it off. Yeah. That's Savannah. What are you doing, Glenn?
I'm resting my butt.
Are you waiting to eat at Paula Dean's?
I am. It's right now 11:39 and we eat there at 12:15. We have reservations for a whole bunch of us. Are you hungry?
Yes.
What you gonna eat?
We're eating a buffet
A buffet?
of good food, I hope. I'm
Buffet
sure.
of good food.
It's a little windy, but warm.
Windy and warm. That's a wonderful tune. get to travel with this bunch of God-fearing senior loonies. That don't know any better than to have fun wherever they go.
Are you talking about yourself?
No, I'm talking about you.
They are. Oh, really? Nature stuff. What all they've seen so far. Oh, you want that and all that stuff. Well, they haven't studied that.
City Hall. Courthouse.
We're going down, and we see the Savannah River. And it was named by the Shawnee Indians. The Shawnee Indians were here, and then they moved north, and they called it Savannah, S-A-V-A-N-A, and it was corrupted and now has become Savannah. And it means River of the Glades. It goes 13 miles out here and empties into the Atlantic Ocean. We're going to be coming up to one of our new monuments, and it's a monument to World War II. And you're going to see it. It's going to be on your left once we get past all this worker business here. Spanky's. You're going to Spanky's. This is the other end. Well, I'll show you where the drop-off is. Okay? Okay. So you're going to Spanky's tonight. Well, that's great. They've got great French fries. Yeah, well, I understand you are going for pizza. And you see it coming across on one of those water taxis. And you can pick it up down here by the Hyatt Hotel. You can go over to Hutchinson Island, and it's free. If you wanted to take a little water taxi ride, you can do that too. Now, look here on the left. You're going to see a globe, and it looks like it's split. And it's called The World Turned Asunder. And it's a World War II monument, and it is split. And that is the Pacific Theater and the European Theater. Savannah lost 400 men and women, and their names are all inside there. And if you wanted to come back tonight and take a picture of it, please do. Savannah was really involved in World War II. This is where the Mighty Air Force started in 1942. And they were shipped almost immediately to England. And by the time the war was over, there were 350,000 men and women in that 8th Air Force. Now, this is where you'll be able to get off the bus tonight, right here. And do you see there's a little building with a green awning? That's the tourist center. You can get any information in there, and there are restrooms. Now, very important restrooms. It is. Now, take a look. Do you see that white kind of shaft over there? That is an elevator. And that will take you from River Street on up and let you off by the Hyatt. And if you wanted to walk across the street to City Market, you could do it. Well, you might want to let them off down by Florence Martis and let them walk back. Okay. All right. buildings that you're seeing were built between 1740 and 1850. And they were the warehouses for the cotton, the rice, the sugar. The merchant had his office on the top. He wanted to get over to Bay Street. The banks were over there, the cotton exchange. Savannah was sending the price of cotton all over the world. But he wasn't able to get over. The merchant wasn't able to get over. Because, and you're going to see, we're going to pull up here, we're not going to pull up, we're going to pass by. But you're going to see two columns here. And look between them, and you'll see why those merchants couldn't get up onto Bay Street. You see that there's a lane running behind. So what they did, they built little iron bridges. And those merchants were known as factors, and that became known as the Factor's Walk. And now this whole area is known as Factor's Walk. But they had another problem. Everything was sand here. Oh yes, they're making the baskets. When it rained, those wagons couldn't get anywhere. So coming up is a solution. The ships came in over here, and what were they carrying as ballast? Cobblestones. So they took those and they paved. And you be careful walking. You're walking on those early cobblestones. And look up here. See all the cobblestones. And see the little iron bridges. There's the Factor's Walk. Now, over here on the other side of the river is Hutchinson Island. And that is part of Savannah. And in the early 1800s, that's where the rice plantations were. And 3 hurricanes came, and they were gone with the wind, and they never come back. And this place became terrible. It was all overgrown. There were sunken barges. And the story was, if you murdered somebody, you got them over to Hutchinson Island because nobody would ever find them. Well, about 25 years ago, the city and the county got together and they started clearing this. And when they did, the Western came in and built a hotel. And that is a modern-day version of the old breakers in Florida. And they put a convention center in there, got a wonderful golf course. Now, this river, when Oglethorpe came, was 7 feet deep. It's been dredged to 42, and it's got the go-ahead to be dredged to 47, because we are a major shipping port for container ships. We rival New York, New Jersey, and Long Beach. There is Spanky's. Believe me, you won't have any trouble finding a place to eat around here, okay? And if you do, you can go to the city market, you can go across the street. And here's yes, everybody said, oh, we missed this shopping. This was supposed to show you what shopping was like back in the day. And we have a 5 and 10, but believe me, nothing is 5 or 10. And here's another possibility for eating, Joe's Crab Shack. You overlook the river. It used to be where the tugboats tied up. The tugboats that brought in the ships. And they moved on, and this has been redone as a very nice restaurant. You can sit inside or you can sit overlooking the water. Now we want to get a spot here. Maybe we can pull in front of that bus, that red bus, unless there's something there. Because this, it looks like there is. Well, we got to see this. This is one of the big stories. Just pull in front of this bus and we'll kind of wing it. Because over here on your left is Florence Marta's, and I've got got to tell you about her. She is a waving girl. And in 1895, she was born at Fort Pulaski. That's on out the road here, on the river. Her father was an army sergeant. Well, right off Fort Pulaski is just a little island called Cockspur, and there's a lovely little lighthouse called Cockspur Lighthouse. And her brother was the lighthouse keeper. Well, things happened in the family, and Florence had to go live with her brother at the lighthouse. Well, that was fine until she got in her teen years, and then it was very lonely. So she got the bright idea she's going to welcome in every ship. During the day, she waves a towel, and at night, she has a lantern. And she has her collie dog, and he gets into the act as well. If she goes to bed, the ship snorts, she gets up. Well, people would go in because they couldn't get in. They couldn't get out in the dark. So he petitioned King George III to get a treaty to bring in another colony, and Georgia will be the last of the 13 colonies, and it will be different. It will be a kind of a change. He said he will bring these people in, and he will rehabilitate them, and they have another chance for life. Well, the king loved that. He wanted to be rid of them. They were a economic drain on the government, and he also wanted a few things. He wanted the silk industry, he wanted the wine industry, and Georgia was going to be a buffer zone because who was in Florida? Those nasty Spanish. And they wanted South Carolina, which is on the other side of the river. So we would be the buffer here to keep the Spanish in Florida. Well, the poor silkworms, they ate the mulberry trees, and they made 13 pounds of silk, and they died because they couldn't stand the humidity here. So the queen got a dress, and that was the end of the silk business. And the same thing with grapevines. They didn't like it here either. We've got a grape industry or wine industry in North Georgia. Two things loved it here: cotton and peaches. Now we have a problem, a modern-day problem with the peaches. We were the peach state. We are no longer the peach state. That horrible South Carolina over there, they are now the peach state. They produce more peaches than we do. But we have become the blueberry state. But there's a problem with that. Because if you saw a pretty girl, you'd say, she's as pretty as a Georgia peach. But you can't say that anymore. And what woman wants to be compared to a Georgia blueberry? Okay? All right, now we're going to go up around, and you're going to see a stone embankment. That's where Savannah got started in 1733. It's 45 feet above sea level. And if you take a good look at those little rectangles. I want you to go up there. You can do it. These coach drivers can do it. All right, that's where they put the cannons Yes, they put the cannons through there. And thank you very much. That's very kind. And they fortified the city for the Revolutionary and the Civil War. This is the old fort area. And the English built a fort there during the Revolutionary War. And if you know your history, there was a general called Mad Anthony Wayne. And I got it. Thank you. And he got rid of the English, and so they named this Fort Wayne in honor of Mad Anthony. Okay, now when we get the lights, you're going to... I'm going to show you the most haunted house in Savannah. Anyway, he mentioned that you like to know things about Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Well, this house ties into it. And Savannah calls itself the most haunted city in America. And everything has a ghost story to it. And what we're going to do is when you get down here, you see that arrow? That's Price. You want to turn left. And stay in the left lane. Yes, you're going to see a lot of pretty houses. I'm going to tell you about 4 special houses. Okay. Now, get over and go. We can't go into a lot of these. They don't allow the motor coaches into a lot of these squares. So, they go slow up. And I want you to get ready to look. You're going to look to your left and then look on the right-hand side. And you're going to see what looks like a New England house, and it has a widow's walk on top of it. And that's the Hampton Lily house. And that is the most haunted house in Savannah. Now, you people all say you like Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil? Well, Jim Williams bought that house. It was over there. There was an empty lot. He moved that house over there, and when he did, just go as slow as you can, and without getting beeps from people. And when they moved the house, the next one collapsed, and it killed a workman. And Jim Williams said, I should have known better. I should have not gone any further, but he did. His workmen quit. They said there were more people in the house than were on the payroll. And they heard music. They had their tools stolen. It was not good. Well, you were in there, and you slept with a German Luger under his pillow. And it's that Luger that he ends up killing Danny Hansford with that causes the book to be written about him, okay? Now, there's a doctor that's living in there. My neighbor, ghost story, was talking to him one day, and he said he knew him well enough. He said, you ever hear any of those funny moves or music or anything? And he said, basically, it's been peaceful since my ex-wife left. Now, we're going to turn right. Yeah, the light. All right, that's house number 1. And there's 3 more I want you to know about that have an interesting story. We're going to be turning left at this next street. I want you to look quickly to the right. That is the Berrien House. It is in the throes of a major restoration. It dates back to 1795. Yeah. And we're going to pull up alongside that house. And we're turning, and you'll see what was an old drugstore on your right. And it was called the Anti-Migraine Pharmacy. And if you look, you can see the word migraine still on the side. Yeah, migraine headaches. What we're doing is we're pulling up alongside the Davenport House. The Davenport House is very important because it's what started the restoration of this downtown area. If it wasn't for the Davenport House, we'd be long gone. We would have not even bothered. This is a federal-style house built by a young carpenter from Rhode Island. He had no training in architecture, and yet he's credited with building one of the fine federal-style homes that still stands in the South. However, around the corner, and we'll see it, is another house. It was a funeral home, and in 1955, it bought this house to destroy it so it could have a parking lot. They were tearing everything down in 1955. They were going to tear down every building on River Street and put a modern shopping center. And all the squares, they were going to take down all the trees and make them individual parking places. However, 7 rather angry women got together, and they said, if this house goes, every historic house is going to go. They managed to save it, and then they triggered the downtown restoration. Those 7 women were referred to as urban gorillas with girls. Okay, we're going around the block. Yeah, and you take a look at the front of the Davenport house, and you'll see it has a very federal look. Then we're going up alongside this house over here. It is Queen Anne Victorian. And yeah, you're making that little juke, and then you're going to turn right. And take a look at the trim on this house. Above and below the windows, the columns, everything is iron. William Kehoe had an iron factory, and he was showing off what iron could do. And we're going around the corner, and in 1980, who buys this house for $80,000? No, here, yeah. I keep forgetting you have to swing out. You can't just, yeah. Joe Namath bought that house for $80,000. Joe Namath. Now, guess what Broadway Joe was going to do? He was going to turn it into a Playboy club. Well, who's over there with an office in the Davenport house? 7 angry women. Poor Joe. For 2 years, it was the strangest thing. He could never get a permit. Well, he gave up and he sold it for $156, so he made a little. This is the other house I want you to know about, because it is an urban villa. And it is probably the fanciest house here in the city. It is the Owens Thomas house, and we're going to pull up. We can talk about this a little bit. And do you see a little strip there that is tabby. And this house is made of tabby, and that's oyster shell, lime water, and sand. The problem with tabby is it's absorbent. The water gets in, so they have to cover it with stucco. So you have this. This is the Owens Thomas house. It is the finest example of English Regency architecture in the country. And when we swing around, you'll see it. But you have the house, you have the gardens, and across the back, you have the carriage house. And the side of the carriage house that faces us, that's where the horses and carriages were. But on the other side, upstairs, downstairs, that's where the slaves are. That is the best kept slave quarters in the Southeast. And if you remember the miniseries Roots, they used that slave quarters because it is so appropriate. And it's still got the original hate blue paint all through it. And that's part of the Nietzsche culture. They were afraid of ghosts. They knew that ghosts would not cross water. So they came up with this paint. It was buttermilk, they put lime in, they kept the bugs down, and the color was from crushed indigo. And there were indigo plantations all along here. And so the original blue is still in there. And so it's really quite an interesting thing. Now we're going to go around, and when we go around the front of the house, take a look at it. Like I told you, it is English Regency. It's the first time an architect was used in Savannah, and it was started in 1816, finished in 1819. And when it was done, it had full plumbing. It had water closets, tubs, everything. And that was 14 years before the White House. Okay, we're going to turn left and we're going to turn right. Now this is Oglethorpe Square, and you would think Oglethorpe's statue would be here. But nobody's statue is in the square that it was named after. So we're going to find him later on. We're going to turn here. All right, you're going to see a building on your right that's got a lot of bicycles in front of it. That tells you it belongs to Savannah College of Art and Design. That is the largest art school in the country. They have no campus. They take over a building that's been abandoned, and this is an old department store. It looked terrible. They went in there, they redid it, and it is now their library. So they have redone close to 100 buildings here in Savannah. So they're a major player. They have 9,000 students here. Yeah, we're going straight. Okay, up here on the right is the Lucas Theater. That is Art Deco. But its chief claim to fame was it was the first commercial building in the Southeast to have air conditioning. And nobody cared what movie was going on in the summer. They just wanted to pay to get in. It was air conditioning. And when Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil was filmed, they gave all the sets and all the costumes, they were auctioned off, and it was used to renovate the theater. And we're going to turn left here. And when we turn left, look over there, you're going to see the statue of John Wesley. John Wesley was an Episcopalian when he got here. He came in 1734. He was going to teach the Indians, and the people here had lost their minister, so they asked him to be their minister, and he got himself into a lot of trouble. He fell in love with a girl named Sophia Hopkins, but he never told her. And she got tired of waiting, so she married somebody else. And they escaped. They went over to Hutchinson Island into South Carolina and got married. And when they came back, and then you're going straight. Yeah. They asked John Wesley to bless them, and he said no, because he was mad. And so the new groom said he was going to sue Wesley for defamation of character. John Wesley escaped. He went over to Hutchinson Island, over to Charleston, and went back to England and started the Methodist Church. So that shows you. Now this is the Pink House, one of the finest restaurants in the city. It was built in 1789 for John Haversham, who was a successful businessman. And it is haunted. Yes. If you go to the downstairs dining room, there is a bar, and they said you'll see this man sitting at the end of the bar, and he looks like he's in Revolutionary War clothes. But the owner said it's just John. He comes back to make sure they're doing a good job. Now, when you started out at Johnson Square, and I want to tell you a little bit about Johnson, and if there's a spot where you can pull up, Johnson Square is important because it's the largest of all the squares, and it is the very first square. And it was where everybody came to get their news. They heard about the Revolutionary War here. They heard that Georgia had succeeded during the Civil War. And for those early colonists, the communal oven was in there and the communal well. They would have to go over there to cook and get their water. Now, the obelisk that's in the center is to Nathaniel Greene. And he was second in command to Washington during the Revolutionary War. And he and Mad Anthony Wayne, they got rid of the English here. Well, they had no money to give him, so they gave him a plantation, Mulberry, down on the river. But Greene was a Connecticut Yankee, and he couldn't stand the weather. He only lived here 2 years. He died of heat stroke. Well, that left his wife, Katie, with this plantation and teaching the children. She goes back to Connecticut to get some help. Couldn't find any. On the way down on the ship, she meets two men. One said, well, I'll take over the plantation and run it. And the other one changes the cotton industry in Georgia and the South forever. It's Eli Whitney. And he makes the prototype of the cotton gin on her dining room table. And I want you to see, those are all lagos. And they're indigenous to the South, but not to Savannah. They were brought in. And the reason they were brought in, they were used to make the sailing ships. And you see, they don't have straight limbs. You see how they're all, well, that's what they wanted. They were already bent, and they needed the wood to be bent to do some sailing ships. Okay, now we're going to turn around. And if you looked here to your right, you'll see where you had lunch at Holidays. And if you see any of these horses and carriages, take a good look at the horses. They are not clubs. They are retired Amish farm horses. And once a year, they send them down here, and the carriage companies buy them. And for the most part, they're Belgians and Percherons. So take a good look at them if you see them. We're going to turn right. And we are getting our first department store. It is Swedish, and guess what? It has an elevator. We just don't know what to do. You see, so many of these buildings are in the process of being restored. And where you see the men right here on the right, this is a Swedish department store. And poor McDonald's. They were so unhappy when McDonald's came, but they took over a building that had been abandoned. And they said they would not have a drive-up window, they would have a walk-up window. So they managed to survive. But that's the only fast food on Broadway Street. Now this is Franklin Square, named after Benjamin Franklin, and it was the water square. It had the big silo that had the water for the little town. And if you would want a tattoo, there's the ghost town tattoo on your right. Now as we turn right, I want you to look at the buildings. These were all originally just little shops from way back when. I mean, you could buy anything. You could buy meat, you could buy goats, you could buy anything. And then it fell into disrepair in the city in the 1980s, they brought it all back, and it is a pedestrian-friendly area, the city market, and if you see, you can get food, you can get art, you can get anything you want there, and you just walk around. Yeah, you're going to go around the corner, just keep going. And I showed you that elevator. If you took that elevator and got off at the Hyatt, you could walk right over there. And we're going to turn. Yeah. Now, remember I told you about the First African Baptist Church, and I said it had a secret. Well, you see how it's built up 5 feet off the ground. That was the site for the Underground Railroad. And they would bring the slaves and put them down there. And the flooring, if you go in there, you look at the flooring, and it has little holes in it in a diamond design. You think, oh, isn't that pretty? But that was the air holes for them to keep breathing. And at night, they took them down to the river. We better go. There's no, we're going to go. Now, that church kept that quiet until 1955. They never knew it was part of the Underground Railroad. That's a slave-made church. They would put torches in the square. The women would carry bricks in their aprons, and the men would do it straight ahead. Yeah. Now, what you're in now, these are the places where the slave traders had their business. The first floor was always a legitimate business. Might be a butcher shop, whatever. The second floor was for the slave traders. And if there was a third floor, that's where they kept slaves until the time of the slave auction. Big business, they would make $300,000 at a slave auction here. And they had the diaries of some of these people that had legitimate businesses, and they all say the same thing, that on the day of the auction, they couldn't stand the weeping that went on. And that was husbands being separated from wives, children separated from parents. And then we're back to Ellis Square. And over on the other side is a European hotel. And it was built on the site of the biggest of the slave auctions. And we're going to turn right here. I'm going to tell you a story. We're coming down toward the Telfair Museum. Mary Telfair was very wealthy. And she and her sister Charlotte went to Europe. And we're going to go straight. And they met William Hodgkins. And he was with the U.S. government. And Mary got sure he was going to ask her to marry him. And he did propose, but he proposed to her sister and married her. Well, Mary never married. She was very wealthy. When she died, she didn't want anyone living in her house. So she told the attorney to turn her house into a museum. And it is the first big museum in the South. Now, she also said there was never to be any smoking and drinking going on when that was a museum. And you people know Jim Williams, and he was president of the board here. And one night they had a big party, and they were smoking, they were drinking. We're going to turn back. And the ceiling fell in on them. And Mary meant what she said, no smoking and drinking. And even today, if the Telfair has any kind of a party, they put a tent in Telfair Square. They have no parties in there. And when we get down, you're going to turn around. Now this, right ahead of us, I'm afraid Mary would be turning in her grave. This is the addition to her museum. And notice how modern it is. It doesn't quite fit. And to add insult to injury, we are going straight through between between the federal buildings. Now the federal government came in and told Savannah they were going to build Greek Revival office buildings. So ladies and gentlemen, this is your government's idea. No, straight. Yeah. This is your government's idea of Greek Revival. And if you live here, you refer to them as the bathroom tile buildings. The building on the left is the old courthouse. It was used as a post office. And when they filmed, when Clint Eastwood filmed Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, he used this as a courthouse because the courthouse today is too modern. We are coming up to Wright Square, and ladies and gentlemen, this is the hanging square. Hanging, yes. And we're going to go around it, Dave. The first woman in the colony was hanged here. She was Alice O'Reilly. She was Irish. She was an indentured servant. She was brought over here in 1734, and she was to take care of a little old man named William Wise. He lived on Hutchison Island, and her boyfriend came also, and he was in charge of all the animals in the farm over there. Well, the problem with William Wise was he was nasty, and he had long white hair, and he always wanted his hair washed. Well, she got tired of it, so her boyfriend came with her. And he put his knee on William Wise's chest, and Alice Riley washed his hair. Washed it so well she held his head in a bucket of water and he drowned. And over here where you see all these azaleas, this is where she was hanged. And the thing is, on the first day of the trial, she told everyone she was with child. And the bailiff decided, we're going to go around the square. Decided to wait her out, and 7 months later, she gave birth to a little boy. And she was allowed to keep that little boy for 3 weeks, and then she was brought here and hanged. And she cursed the city. And that's why there's no Spanish moss hanging here. And you see the CVS pharmacy? They don't care. They close at 6 o'clock, and they're the only drugstore down here that they are not going to walk through that square at night. Doesn't matter. No. Now, if there's a little bit of Spanish moss hanging, that tells you something. Alice Riley will be back. Okay? Now, what happened to her boyfriend? Well, he was hanged too. But he was a burly Irishman. And he hung on those things for 3 days. He just kept hanging around. And we're going to turn around. Coming up on your left is the home of Juliet Gordon Lowe, the founder of the Girl Scouts. And over here on the right is one of our hottest restaurants. A man from Melbourne, Australia, has come over and recreated a cafe that was in Melbourne. And we're going straight. Now, over here on the right, you're going to see a church. It's the Independent Presbyterian Church. It was built in 1820, and it's burned a couple times, so it's been fixed. But you know Forrest Gump, right? Well, the opening of that movie, there's a feather that just flies Chickasaw Square. Well, that's where the bench was, where he sat and said, "Life is like a box of chocolates." After the movie was done, Paramount took the bench. And we're going to turn it on. And you would have thought Sherman came through again. I mean, they were so mad here. So it has been brought back, and it is now down in the museum at the Information Center. Yeah. And this is a Baptist church. It was the only church that stayed open during the Civil War here, and it had 2 sermons. One for the Southern folk, and one for the Yankee soldiers. And never the twain did meet. Now you'll notice, we're going to turn left, but do you notice the beautiful wrought iron work? We can rival New Orleans. And the reason is, when those ships stopped carrying the cobblestones, they started carrying wrought iron as ballast, and it was put to good use. And we're going to turn in. If you look to your left, you're going to see General Overthrow. Yes. And he is in full battle dress. He is facing his enemies, the Spanish. Oh, by the way, this is the Sixpence Puff. And if you have ever seen Something to Talk About with Julia Roberts and Dennis Quaid, Dennis Quaid was inside with another woman, and Julia Roberts runs up in her nightgown and bangs on the window. Now we're going to turn it on. Now, the steeple that you see to the right, that is the beautiful Catholic cathedral. And if we find a parking spot, for those of you who want to go into it, I'll be glad to take you in. It's free of charge, and it's absolutely stunning inside. But we're going to turn left here. We'll go. We have something else I want to show you up here. We'll make a little turn, and if one goes away, we'll go. And if some of you don't want to go in, the dueling grounds are over there, and you can sit in the dueling grounds and wait for us. See, Oglethorpe, there were things he didn't allow. He didn't allow any strong drink. He didn't allow the Catholics to practice because Spanish people were Catholics, and he didn't allow attorneys into the colony. He said they just disorganized things. And so people used the dueling grounds. It was kind of the quick and the dead. And if you will look here, as we get beyond these trees, look to your right, you're going to see a flat place there. Those are the dueling grounds. Oh my, they had them roped off. Maybe there was a duel. Anyway, what I want to point out to you, this is the Colonial Cemetery. When we get past this, you'll be able to see it. It was started in 1750, and by 1850 it is full. There are 10,000 people there. Now, how could they get 10,000 people in there? Well, you see those brick burial crypts? A family would buy them, and there were 3 slabs on this side, 3 slabs on this side, 3 slabs across the back. And as soon as you had kind of dissolved, then the next person in your family took your slab. And right in the middle was an ossuary, and that was a bone box. And so all your bones were put in there. So it was like early recycling. Now, during the Civil War, Sherman came in here December of 1864. He had 60,000 troops. And he bivouacked over every square. And the ones that went in there were the ones with the horses and wagons. Well, it was December, it was cool. They had traveled all the way across Georgia, and they were tired. So you know what they did. They moved all the bodies, crawled up on the slabs, and they slept. And when we get down, turn right. Coming up, on your right is the oldest police barracks in America. It was built before the Civil War, but hey, take a look at the old police cars. There's something. There's a building here that's interesting. We're coming down. I'm going to tell you more about that cemetery. But you see a building, it has a very Moorish top to it. That's the old jail. And it was used until 1988. And Savannah College of Art and Design has taken it over to the sports headquarters. But take a look. Take a look through there. You see the cells? There's 142 cells. And they were open to the weather. Think how hot in the summer and cold in the winter. And they've left it like that so people can go in and see that. And we're going to turn right here and swing out. This is a tough turn because you have the curve on that other side. Those Yankee soldiers. They didn't have anything to do because Savannah, they just gave up. They surrendered. And there were no battles here. They didn't have anything to do, so they changed the headstones. And if a woman died and she was 50, they gave her another 0. She was 500. And if she happened to have had 5 children, they gave her another 0 and she had 50. They did the same to the men. The children were born before their parents and people died before they were born. And if you went in and you looked on that back wall, you would see all these headstones with those Yankees changed. And it was better than burning the city down because he left here and he completely torched Columbia, South Carolina. To do now, we're going out of the historic district. That's 2.2 square miles. And we're going down to Forsyth Park. And that's the Victorian district. You are going to see a complete change in architecture. And by the way, do any of you need a restroom stop? Raise your hands if you'd like. Well, we could stop in Forsyth Park, and they have a lovely little cafe there, and they're used to tourists, and if you want to take a bathroom break, you can do it, okay? And those of you that take pictures, the most beautiful fountain is in Forsyth Park. That is the most beautiful fountain in Savannah. I'll show you while you're waiting for the restroom people. You can take a picture of this gorgeous fountain. A really nice little area here that's blossomed up. Straight ahead, and when you go over on the other side, slow up. Because those of you who are midnight fans, if you will look to your left, the street, you're going to see a house, and it has white columns on the back. Take a look. See what I mean? That is Jim Williams' house, and that's where the shooting occurred. And this was his antique shop. And around the corner, in one of those condos, is where Clint Eastwood lived when he was filming Midnight. And he was very well liked here. He was low-key, very nice. Now, we're coming to the light, and Gaston Street is the end of the historic district. And over on your right, you're going to see William Hodson's house. Remember Helper, Mary Helper? Well, he married her sister. But the important thing was, and go slow down here so they can see, he gave 5 acres, and he wanted a park started that looked like the park in New York, Central Park. Now, take a look at the architecture on your right, and you see there is an abrupt change there. They have, they're very lush, they've got very interesting gardens. They are, some of them are Bible, some of them are, but and you see this, if people come and string their hammocks, look at over there at the left. I mean, this is just for fun. This is a fun park where people are supposed to come and relax. And you're going to see Queen Anne Victorian, really interesting. Now, coming up on your left, you see a low white building? That is the Garden for the Blind. And they can go in there, and everything has been grown with aroma. So they go in there and they can enjoy gardening as well. Now coming up on the right is a very ordinary looking apartment building. That's where John Berendt, he had a 4th floor apartment. He stayed there while he wrote the book. And if you look to your left, you'll see the monument to the Confederate soldier. And again, it was a bunch of women, and they decided there should be something to commemorate all those soldiers who died. And they had a bake sale. They got all this money, and they sent away to Nova Scotia and had a sculptor up there do it. And right down here. And the caveat was, when he was done with it, it could not touch Yankee ground. So it had to come down the coast and into port here. But when they saw it, they hated it. He didn't put a soldier at the top. He put a symbol of death and a symbol of silence. But unfortunately, they had no more money. So a nice man here, he said, I know a sculptor that will do a soldier for you, but guess what? They've never gotten over it. That sculptor was from New York City, and he was a Yankee, and there's a Yankee did the top of that Confederate. We're going left. I forgot to tell you. then you can get in the right basin. We'll stop for a few minutes.
Hey Charlie, look at that truck on the left.
Now, if you look over here on the right, if you live in the historic district, you have to have your paint colors passed. But he's into the Victorian district, so look how many colors he's used over there, and they can't do anything to him. Stay in the right-hand lane. Now, as you can see, this is just the fun part. A lot of people are sunbathing, and sometimes we have a lot of college kids, and sometimes you see the women bathing with no tops on. And I had a driver, and he was really busy looking, and the man, Rick, said, "Keep your eyes on the road." And he said, "I was admiring the trees." Yeah. Okay, now when we get up here, here's the mansion. The mansion is a new building. It looks Romanesque revival because they bought the funeral home that is Romanesque revival and they made it into their restaurant, so they tied the whole thing together. And we're going to turn on the right here and see if we can get a parking spot. It is quite lovely. They're not supposed to stay there. No. Now maybe he would put a pool on. Well, they had a reenactment. Rosie the Riveter. Okay, he's going to go. If you notice over here, this is a house that was done over by Savannah College of Art and Design. Look how they used the mirrors on the outside, and it's reflecting everything into it.
What a beautiful park.
time were we supposed to be back? Just wait till whenever we do it. I
Makes an awful noise with them dominoes. So scary.